Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. Kick those fires. And actually, I have to say again, kick those tires and start that virtually fake fire. We are camping once more, virtually, albeit, and I am very pleased to welcome two incredible people I've had the privilege of knowing for now several years, and what they currently possess in the Holy Spirit, wisdom, and grace. They certainly lack with their decision to declare allegiance to pagan institutions such as Oklahoma and Baylor University. We all know biblically what happens when our hearts are divided. A house and kingdom divided cannot stand. We will cover this and more, but more importantly, we'll be discussing the topic of family, friends, and an incredible testimony of faith. So if you're considering a crazy decision and your friends are saying maybe you shouldn't do it, this is the episode for you. Please welcome Chris and Julie Bennett, pastors and leaders of Vintage Malibu. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, my
Hello.
friend.
It's great to be here. We're ready. We have our
It's
little
our campfire.
fire. It's our little campfire.
Look at that. I like that little intention candle. That's good.
Love you
Now,
took a shot at Baylor in Oklahoma right off the bat just to create a
Yeah.
little bit of tension in
I
the
like it.
conversation. So well played.
absolutely. I was going to ask because I know as a pastor, Chris, you obviously deal with idolatry, not necessarily personally, but you help people wrestle through this. And I'm curious, like the same fervor that you find, on the Sooner sideline, or the Baylor Bears, do you find that same fervor in worship on a Sunday in church, or is that something we all should be pondering?
No, it's a very similar type of worship.
I mean,
It's-
after the 10 sessions of therapy, I feel like it's
yes. So
going
we're trying to just
better.
turn worship a different direction is all.
Mm.
But now that our
That's-
son's playing college football, we're a little conflicted,
I know. Well, hey, when the Lord gives you a cannon, right? Fire away, right?
I've always said that.
I've
always
yeah.
have said that.
That's right. Hey, it's what to do. So, but no, obviously we love, Oklahoma as a proud USC Trojan. My history with Oklahoma is fond. We don't need to go
We're
back
on
to those.
national championships and such. Yes.
That's right. But we'll discuss that later. I'm excited to have you on because you have an incredible story. In fact, so much so that I'm torn on where to begin. But I find the beginning is usually the most convenient place. But you were not always here in Los Angeles in paradise. You currently live in the closest thing we have to Eden on the planet, which is Malibu.
Yeah,
And so, yeah, it's amazing. So but how you got out there, it was not a straight and very easy path. In fact, how does one leave the great state of Oklahoma and venture forth to?
Yeah. I was about to say something funny and it just left me.
Well, if it comes back, Ryan's
Okay,
trying
okay,
to.
okay.
He hadn't gotten there yet, so
Um,
give it some time.
No, so your testimony is amazing how you got there. So give us, I know you shared this a little bit on some other podcasts, but your story of how you got out here is absolutely incredible. So walk us through how you became sojourners out here.
Yep. So I'll give you the quick, we've been married 23 years. We have 4 kids, not that you asked, but we lived in Oklahoma, pastored a church there for nearly a decade. 2018, through a myriad of ways, all we could say is God called us to LA. And we had dreams, we had visions, we had stuff that we'd never even experienced before that was pointing us to go. And I used to always tell our church in Oklahoma this phrase, if God asks you to do something or invites you into something, say yes before you know how. And that always sounded really good. And then we had our own opportunity to actually put it into practice. And so we felt led. We just made the decision to uproot. We transitioned the church over to one of our pastors who's still leading it today. We're still in relationship with them. And we moved to LA and we landed in LA. I've got a picture August 19th, 2018 with my 2 oldest boys, Bo and Nate. They were 14 and 12. We're at LAX. I don't know where I'm staying that night. Julie's back home, being
Packing
an
up the
amazing
house
woman,
by myself.
packing up our home with our 2 youngest
Cut the
kids. And the goal was we're going to sell our house in Oklahoma. We're going to use that money from the house to give us kind of a 6-month on-ramp because we felt led to create, media content around the family and just kind of organically pastor people in the city, which again, how do you make money doing that? We realized faith is very naive. And so we knew enough just to say yes. So yeah, we moved out here and the house came under contract. I met a family the week I moved out here with my boys that lived in Burbank that said, hey, come live with us till you sell your house. They were empty nesters. They were going to be there 2 weeks. Julie comes out with the other 2 kids. 2 weeks turns into 9 weeks because the contract in our house fell through. And so we picked a move out date, which was going to be November 9th. And then I'll let you pick it up what happened right around the beginning of November.
Yeah. Well, let me just preface, don't try this at home.
I don't try this.
Is what I'd like to say. No, we came out to LA thinking we've just been through the hardest season of our life.
One of
And
the hardest.
yes, that's very true. Very many hearts. One of the hardest season. And so we're going to rest in California for 6 months. And we started off as an adventurous family. And then very quickly, the world forced us into being a brave one, is what I like to say. And I had a troubling thing under my arm that I tried to get checked out at the doctor the week before that we moved to LA. The doctor was unable to get me into the mammogram ultrasound that women usually have to check on, to get their, annual checks. And I thought something's off. And so she said, it's very bizarre that I cannot get you in. I can't seem to work with the scheduling people. This is not normal. I said, listen, I'm moving in a few days. I'll do it in LA. So fast forward to now we are on the ground. We've been here 3 to 6 weeks. I get the biopsy, and as soon as the contract on the house fell through, I also found out that I had stage 3 breast cancer and needed to start chemo immediately. So the people that thought we were crazy for coming in the first place with no job and no real plan except a really big dream in our heart and a whole basket full of words from the Lord now just thought we were crazier. And so it was one of those, like, that soundbite of say yes before you know how feels really, noble until you're faced with what in the world have they done? What in the world have we done? Is even the faith people in our life and other people have gone, is this wisdom? You need to come back now. You own a home still because the contract fell through. And we looked at each other the day that I found I had cancer, and there was a resolve. When you think about the memorial stones in your life, regardless of how long your journey with God's been, whether it's been over decades or whether it's been over a year, you can always look back. And I encourage you to go, I even ask that question your own, like, where did God show up? Not whether something was hard or not, but where did he show up? And it was a moment for us to go, okay, God has never changed who he said he is, but he didn't promise tomorrow would be easy. He just said he wouldn't leave us. So we looked at each other and I said, we found out I had cancer in LA because if I found out in Oklahoma, we would have never have come.
Interesting.
And that's for sure. And so that was the goodness of God that immediately began to weave into a story that we didn't know what was going to look like, but we just said we're going to stay. And then we began to move. We moved 20 times in 6.5 months while I did chemo and with 8 suitcases, 4 children. And it truly changed us forever. But I wouldn't recommend it to anyone.
Okay, there's a lot to unpack here because I know, Chris, for you that probably the biggest step of faith, prior to all this was venturing out past single origin coffee when appropriate. But in all seriousness, like, so I want to go back to the beginning of like hearing from the Lord, like this, because I have said this joke, and I probably need to check my heart on this quite a bit, but I've joked that God only calls people to LA, Austin, or Nashville. It seems there are literally only
Maui, I think's another one.
yeah, but 3 people, like there are 3 cities that God is either building arcs and saving. But I was joking, where is that person who God called to, Omaha? Ironically, I met someone with that story. They left LA to go to Omaha. And I was like, oh, you're the one. Wow, you're the one. But so you're sitting there and I'm curious for those, because obviously you shepherd, especially a lot of young people too. But, for y'all, what does it look like when you say we felt led, right? Because this is something that we can convince ourselves. We've heard things, but obviously you don't just pack up and move on just a hunch. So could you walk us through a little bit about what that was like to feel such a impression saying, hey, no, to not do this is to be disobedient?
Yeah. I feel like there was never a time in our marriage, in our lives where we were like, someday if we could just move to LA and chase our dreams. We had never had that discussion. We were never leaving Oklahoma. We were like, burn the sails. We're here. We've been planting churches and this was it. And God is a master at you not wasting our pain if we don't let it. And coming out of a really hard time, the first part of 2018 had kind of positioned our hearts, even though we weren't fully conscious of it, for that move. And long story short, we had an opportunity in May, June of 2018 where my oldest son, who's almost 20 now, was 14 at the time and got a full scholarship to go to this incredible art school, Christian art school, and he needed a chaperone. So I volunteered. Thank you. I'll go to Pasadena. And so while we were there, I began to have dreams. And I began to say, I think there's something here for us. And he said, no, you're just around creatives, like living your best life with no responsibility. And I was like, I think there's something here, but I mean, that's not possible. We pastor a church and I mean, it's LA, but I think it's so I kept having dreams, and then we kind of tag teamed, and Chris came out here, and then I'll kind of let him take it
Yeah,
from
no, it's
there.
a good setup. I mean, so I think there's a few pieces in there that she alluded to. And as I'm thinking specifically of when you're making big decisions. Now,
Mm.
I think the younger we are, so from a parenting standpoint, we entrust our kids with more as they demonstrate maturity. We give them more opportunity, more responsibility. And when I think about how God trains us as children, I think the more it's not about perfection or performance, but the faithfulness demonstrated, that definition of faithfulness, long obedience in the same direction. I found that the more we demonstrate that over time, God entrusts us with more. I mean, that's certainly a biblical principle. So I'm just saying you can't take our story and say, oh, therefore I should uproot my family and move across country.
Yep.
For us, there were some key pieces. There was a
Good.
painful season of pruning through leadership stuff we went through that was so difficult. And what the pain and the pruning and the pressure, there's 3 P's for you, buddy. I grew up in the Baptist church. Those things, what they did was they pushed us. There's your 4th to a posture. Okay, I gotta stop.
Wow.
But a place of openness that I don't think we ever would have been open to before, which was like, oh, what if there's a change? What if there's something God is trying to show us out of this season that we never would have been open to before? So I think that was the first place. There had to be a humility and an openness that God may be doing something different. But we didn't want to make a decision out of pain or running from something. It had to be being called into something. So once we started, feeling led that direction, and I don't know if you want me to share these,
Right.
but there were a couple very distinct dreams that I had that were very specific, that I'm not a dreamer. Joel's dreams a lot, but I had some very, very specific dreams. But I'll tell you one situation that happened spring of 2018 during the most challenging time we were going through with our church at that time, which again, fast forward, ended really beautifully. But I was dead asleep and I woke up to, I can't say that it was the audible voice of God, but I heard him in a way I've never heard before. Maybe you'd call it like the inner audible voice.
He
But
woke me up like this with it, though.
yeah,
It's crazy.
it startled
I
me.
remember that.
I woke up and I heard 3 phrases in my spirit so clear. And his voice said, Israel was in the wilderness 40 years before the promised land. Jesus fasted 40 days before he began his ministry. And then he said, when you turn 40, you're entering your promised land. And I was 39. Woke up to that, wrote it down, woke up Julie. I said, I don't know what this means, but I think something significant is going to happen at 40. So you fast forward a couple months, Julie's in LA. I fly out there for the school. I'm with Bo and Nate, my 2 oldest. I'm there. The first day I get there, and some of the leaders of this school call us up to the front. And this gentleman that I'd never met before, knew nothing about me, began to pray. And he said, I hear God saying that you've been in a wilderness season, but the wilderness is the preparation between the promise and the promised land. But I hear God saying you're leaving your wilderness and you're entering your promised land.
And
No.
he had no knowledge of anything.
And they'd
He had
never met
shared
us before.
nothing.
So he basically just echoed, you had a dream,
Mhm.
and then some stranger basically recites roughly verbatim the inner impression you got innerly.
Totally. And the thing about it was that it was confirmation, but I still didn't know what it was confirmation of. It just felt like, okay, there's something about a new season, a new land that we're coming into out of a really hard season.
Can I also, just since I got a highly pastoral couple here, and this is actually a topic that's come up quite a bit in my own community, but I had a friend actually just call me yesterday and say, hey, this woman came up to me and had a dream. A friend of mine I haven't talked to, but had this vivid dream for me. And I found he was very much wrestling through what's the meaning and trying to find interpretation. And I think about that because it seems we know God speaks through dreams in the Old Testament very clearly. And the question came up, in the New Testament, what scripture do we have to suggest that beyond, your young men will dream dreams, referencing the Joel prophecy, but as far as a decision-making criteria, dreams coming into it, because it does seem that dreams, at least on the outside for me, I've had so many dreams that seem so vivid, so real, and they end up not, and I followed up on them and they were like, were not accurate at all. And so we know God can. So I wonder, if you have any thoughts on where you would weight these, dreams in the context of Holy Spirit guidance, community, because obviously there's a lot of ways that we hear from God. And maybe you could how do you put dreams in the context of how you overall discern what God is speaking to you? Because clearly you had a crazy story where someone acknowledged what you heard, but I'm just curious how you think about that.
Specifically with the New Testament, right?
Yeah, because I actually can't think of any.
I mean,
I
I
was
think
just gonna
when we
use that.
see in the New Testament, you're right, we don't see many examples. We see the reference in Acts to the book of Joel of, our young men will dream dreams for sure. We see visions. We see that in the book of Acts, that the book of Revelation came out of a vision. Paul talks about vision. So I think there's for sure precedence for it. I would say, though, in terms of dreams, you've got some people that say, oh, every dream's a spiritual dream. Jules may have a different opinion on this. I will say my process for when I had dreams that were very vivid. One is you pray into them, and you ask for discernment from the Holy Spirit. Second is I've always brought it to trusted people who know more about dream interpretation than me. So I'm going to share one more example, and I just share it because I hope it's helpful, because it was part of our decision of actually moving, was right around that same time, spring of 18, where I heard those very distinct phrases. It was within that same month I had another dream. And I bet I've had 4 to 5 dreams my whole life that I remember and that felt significant. And when I've had them, and she can share one later about related to her cancer, but I don't want to say they came true, but they were God dreams is what I would say. I had a dream that I was on a 90-minute VIP tour of a yacht. And this is where we're living in Oklahoma. I step onto this yacht. There's a panel, and they're sitting down as Leonardo DiCaprio. There's a supermodel. There's a girl. I remember her name was Kristen. She was at PureFlix Media. They were all sitting down. I'm standing up, but I'm teaching. And there's a room in the yacht of about 250 actors, artists, and entertainers in uniform. And as I'm teaching, they're taking like copious notes. I wake up from the dream, no idea what it means, but in my spirit, my discernment was, this is a God dream. I don't know what it means. So I have a buddy in Scotland who has studied biblical dream interpretation for 20 plus years. That's helpful. I write it down. I send it off to him, and I said, hey, dude, I don't know what this means, but would you pray into this with me? So I think there's discernment from the Holy Spirit. I think then there's trusted people that we bring in that can bring counsel and understanding. The crazy thing was that school Julie was talking about, that next week is when we got that word about the promised land. The day she flew out to LA to be with my son, Bo, the guy in Scotland emails me back. And he said, Chris, this dream's really cool. He said, you're about to come into the fruition of your calling to influence people in film and television in Hollywood and to teach them how to bring the kingdom in their specific area of industry. Now, I read that.
We're in the middle of like...
Immediately, I'm like, this is before.
Oh, that was before.
This is a
right.
God dream. This is a God interpretation. I know, but I live in Norman, Oklahoma. How would that ever happen? So then you could fast forward 3 months later. We haven't got there yet. We've moved to LA, and then I won't go into all the details, but that dream has started to come to fruition since we came to Malibu, actually.
And I actually want to give a biblical reference. So it was Joseph when the Lord gave him a dream to flee before Herod could take his son's life. And so it was that dream. An angel came to him in the dream, and that was I was trying to read Matthew 2:13. And that was a dream that was so specific, and it was like, you have to move now, which reminds me of a dream that a friend had 2 months prior to us moving to LA. Again, no one in Oklahoma thinks we're ever going to leave.
At that point, we didn't think we were ever.
We thought we were never going to leave. We had not been out to the school in Pasadena yet. And she had a dream. The Lord woke her up from this dream, and she said, I'm about to move the Bennetts to LA to save Julie's life. Now, she held on to that because that seems a little crazy, and what does that mean? And with wisdom, she did hold on to that. Yeah. Maybe there's also another thing in our dreams, how we discern them, how we interpret them, how we walk through them with wisdom, which is a whole, maybe another conversation. And then you fast forward, we're in the midst of, do we stay in LA or do we go? And she says, I want to tell you something. You guys have chosen rightly, even though it seems crazy and no one will probably understand you. But again, back to the story of, if I would have found out in Oklahoma, the Lord kept me from going to the doctor because we would have never have moved to LA. But I was supposed to find out LA, and he used the dream that she had 2 years prior with no foreknowledge to confirm that our decision to stay was the right thing.
What I'm hearing is that it happens, and it's all part of a framework, because you have to look at, there's circumstances, there's godly counsel, et cetera. But, it's cool to hear, because I've not studied too much dream interpretation, and it helps if you have, a friend in Scotland who is an expert in biblical dream interpretation. So you had your own Joseph to call, as Pharaoh. So that's great. So you come out to LA, and so I want to fast forward here. So you're out here, and walk me through a little bit too. We've joked about people thinking you're crazy, because we all do this. We all look at our friends taking steps of faith, and we're like, I don't know, because for example, I'd like to think I'm a guy who would join Jesus out on the water. I mean, I'd put a life vest on,
Right.
but I'd go
There you
out
go.
there. And so, when you come out here, right? Are you thinking, oh my gosh, like God's just going to honor it right away and it's going to be confirmed? And then are you kind of, when you get hit with everything, are you like, uh-oh, like, because I think there's an
Yeah.
inherent assumption that many of us go through, which is that obedience necessarily leads to success in our metrics. And I have a feeling you're going to tell me that is
No,
not the case
super easy.
necessarily.
Super. Yeah, I've got it. Well, I just want to tell him.
Okay.
So here's what we would say is faith is naive. And what I mean is God will invite you into something. I've found that he will give you just enough to take the next step. And I think we came out here and had we known everything that we would come up against, because we joke, but it is very figurative, but we came to our promised land. I actually moved to LA September 4th. I turned 40 September 6th. And we're like, sick. We're in our promised land, milk and honey. And then, as you know, there's giants in the land. But
Yeah.
the month after we moved to LA, a guy who's become a close friend of mine now, but who I barely knew, we'd had a couple conversations. He lived in Oklahoma. I get a message from him. He said, hey, I don't know if you remember me. He goes, I tracked your number down through a mutual friend, but I'm reaching out because God woke me up at 4 a.m. this morning with a word for you and your family. He goes, I know that you moved to LA and I know that you guys are called there. But he said, I felt that God said, it's your faith that got you there, but it will be your trust that will keep you there, because trust hits at the deepest issue of the heart, and that God is going to give you incremental clarity along the way. Now, this is before cancer. This is before 20 moves, all the things. I read that and I thought, well, that's sweet. I kind of remember this guy. I put it in my notes, didn't touch it until when everything started to, in our mind, unravel and felt like was falling apart. That word God brought back to mind, because faith is, we have a romanticized view of faith. And so we stepped out in faith, but when pressure comes and trial comes, and even, Psalm 105 says, until the word came to pass in Joseph's life, the word of the Lord tested him. And so it's like God will give you a word, a promise, a call, whatever you want to say. We step out, then it feels like everything opposes the thing that we felt actually called to do. And then what that exposes is cracks in the foundation. And it's not to bring shame, but it's like, oh, what level do I trust him? And I think trust is the undercurrent of faith. I will have faith for as much as the depth of I'm willing to trust in him. So to the point of, I think we felt like crazy people. We didn't feel like heroes. We felt like, did I miss it? Did I make this up? Because everything was opposed to that. So that's where you have to go back and say, all right, God, this is where we trust.
How close were you to saying, you know what, we missed it, we're going back? Or was there ever a moment of like,
so the
we're going
day
back?
she got diagnosed and we were going to be homeless within a week, that week we were moving out and we were in the car. And I'm just stunned. She just got the news. Julie is one of she wouldn't want me she's one of the strongest, bravest humans I know. But I said, babe, do we just go back? House in Oklahoma, your family's in Oklahoma. We have community back there. I don't want to do that, but that seems rational. That actually seems like wisdom. And her response was, babe, God called us here. And as she said earlier, God knew I had cancer there, but he let me find it here because we wouldn't have come. She said, we're called. Nothing's actually really changed. And I remember that same week, I'd heard a message from Bill Johnson, and he was talking about an episode of a season of real sickness and stuff. And he said this line, he said, sometimes God isn't speaking because he's already spoken. And I remember going back and saying, he hasn't told us to do anything other than what we know and what we've been doing. So I guess we're going to presume he's going to take care of us if he called us here.
The Lord had given us enough to when that moment came, which he, of course, foresaw. He's like, they're going to know to stay. Everyone else might not know that, but I've given them enough. And that's the uniqueness about God for us individually. Like, we want to make a formula out of something, and it's not. I remember my sister-in-law at one point, like, well, I mean, we need to do something radical. If we really love Jesus, we need to be like selling some stuff, or like, let's go somewhere crazy. And I was like, wait, that would be a formula. And God's not wanting in our faith to do that, because then we would stop trusting him. And faith for you might be, you homeschool those few kids, you're doing that. it's not a comparison, right? Been given different measures of faith. It doesn't make ours better than yours. They're just different, and our obedience has to look according to that.
Jewel, let me ask you this. Obviously, so as two lifelong Christians, or it seems like people walk with the Lord for quite a bit of time, when you face something like the C word, and which is just and not like a light, oh my gosh, no worries, like it's it's early. It's like, hey, we got to deal with
Yeah.
this now. Um, in that moment, do you have like what's the thought process towards God at this point? This is your own time to wrestle with suffering, et cetera. Was it like, all right, like like were you like, I don't know why, but
Yeah.
you're good and I'm just going to walk through this? Or was there a moment of how could you do
Yeah.
this while
That's
I'm
a
out
good
here?
question. I'll give you a really quick difference between my first battle of cancer in
I don't
2000.
even think I know that yet.
Yeah, and then I was first diagnosed in 2018, stage 3 breast cancer. I started chemo immediately. I was in remission for a year, and then right when the world was shutting down with COVID, my cancer came back with a vengeance. Now, the first time, to answer your question, that initial shock, it was, true confession on our story, we had come out of so much hard. I mean, obviously, clearly my body was breaking down, and I thought I was a healthy person, and then I realized I don't even mean like what I was eating. I actually wasn't. I thought I've had like a salad once a week. I was doing great. I'm like, I have vegetables.
Well, in Oklahoma,
Yeah,
that is
no, I'm
good, right?
like,
We
I
all
only had
live
one
on a
bag of
prairie.
Cheetos today. We're great. Like, no, for real. It was like, it's like you're so skinny. I'm like skinny fat or whatever they call it. I was like, I'm not really healthy. Okay, I'm just inside. I'm breaking down. Anyway, so I don't mean that. That is a component, of course, and it's important because we're body, soul, and spirit. But I was so compartmentalized to just get to this next thing that God called it.
Well, you're saying basically last time, you're like, when it first happened, you're like, I got this. And you're just kind of finishing up that you were feeling really strong and you were, I'm like, I wasn't healthy anymore, but like, I got this and God's got me. And then it went into remission, but that was not the end of it.
No, that's great. Actually, I mean, I wrote a little bit about this in our book, Fighting for Family, but I mean, the first thing, this is how God is so kind to deal with me. If I were to have fully felt all the hard, I think it would have crushed me. But there was a grace that He gave me to experience joy in the midst of moving, like I said, 20 times. And we literally had none of our stuff for over 6.5 months. That's through Christmas, that's through different places of living. And I was able to experience something that carried me through that journey. You fast forward to the second time, I got cancer, and now I'm in a home and I'm settled, and I was completely a mess. I was like, it wasn't the same. You'd think, well, you've done this once. And I then actually, the healthier I got internally, I felt like I had a harder time with the journey. What do I mean by that? Those seem very opposing. Maybe that's the paradox of our different journeys, but it was like I was at a better place emotionally to actually be able to allow myself to integrate, to not compartmentalize the heart, to feel things I needed to feel so that I could be present in the moment. And so again, I could give you a lot longer answer to that, but it's a story for me that I think we can all find ourselves in sometimes in the different hard that we experience that may not be cancer. That may be a different disease. That may be somebody else going through something hard. But we want a 1, 2, 3 step. And it's actually God will meet you right where you're at and give you something to get through it.
And so the story goes now. So you're healthy now, right?
Yes. 2 years cancer free. Yeah.
That's amazing. And so is there an element of how do you balance I'm going to go on a limb and just guess that when you've had a relapse or when a cancer returns like that, is there a healthy tension of like, I'm grateful, I kind of put out of mind, but there's
Yeah.
a regular, just like, okay, like I have to live with a, perpetual, and I won't call it fear, but just an awareness that like,
Mhm.
this is something that we'll have to check for.
No, it's good. It's a great question, and I know you didn't want to say fear, but it is a fear. The deal is we are gonna feel fear. God created emotion; it's what we do with it, and I choose to hope over fear. I'm not striving to be fearless. And again, I do love that word. I think we could be fearless, but I'm just saying I'm gonna have hope over that fear because I know that God's not gonna change for me. So if He's the same yesterday and today forever, then I'm going to take Him at His word. What this journey did for us, what our yes to LA has done for us, if I could sum it up, is it was like we looked at each other and said, do we really believe anything we've ever preached? Well, here we go. And it was just an affirming journey. Not that, well, tomorrow's going to be really easy tomorrow, so don't you worry. No, that's not what God promises. He's like, I'm never going to leave you. What else you got? Oh, I will never leave you or forsake you. Okay, cool. But what about next week? Like, am I going to be cancer-free? Is it going to be hard? I'm never going to leave you or forsake you. Okay, and then you can either take that or be mad about it. You can walk away. You can be bitter. But cancer for me now is, I'm learning language. It's not my cancer. It was never mine. I don't want an identity in that. I can catch myself like, well, my cancer. It's like, no, that was never mine. I will not own that. God just didn't waste it. And cancer's kind of like my front door back here. Like, that's how I feel 2 years later. It's like the unwelcome guest. I'm like, didn't invite you here, but you just want to hang out on the doormat at the front door. Okay, cool. But you don't get to come in. That's how it feels. That's if my fear creeps up, or these scans I get every, 3 months or 6 months, and the blood work and all the things they got to keep checking, especially with a relapse. You know what? I feel anxious today. Or wait a second, I'm coming back to this promise, and you don't get to come in, cancer.
I love that. Along your journey, were there any close friends, and we'll and try to keep these answers like 2 minutes or less, and I'll move you into family and spiritual warfare, because the two are obviously totally related. We are raising little demons. But what do you call it? Were there people you loved and trusted who pulled you aside and said, hey man, guys, I got to be honest, like, what are you doing? Like, I just feel the need to be the voice of reason. What do you left everything, wife's sick, like, come on. Like, were there any Job's friends?
Yeah. And I think they were well-meaning. I think what we've realized is God called us to something doesn't mean he called them to it. And that's
Good.
why when we talk about, we don't compare, is, we don't have to justify the decisions. Now, we want to help people bring understanding, but I think we were really, some of the most painful part of our story leaving was people that we thought would be with us, into every season weren't. And I think looking back, there's different reasons for that. And could we have communicated different and not, but also realizing not every person who was family with you in one particular season may not be called to that next season with you. And not everybody is going to have the same measure. And this sounds like, I don't mean this pridefully, they don't have faith for what we're called to because they're not called to it. So they would look at what we're doing as like, well, that's foolish. And we're saying yes. And faith looks very foolish to those who maybe aren't called to the same thing. So I think we had to give people a lot of grace. We had to work through some really hard things. I had a friend sit me down when we told them that we were moving, and they knew all the backstory of why. And I think I was waiting for them to be like, let's pop the champagne and let's celebrate, and didn't realize, oh, they're losing their friends, they're losing their neighbors, they're losing their whatever pastor all in one, and realizing, oh, this isn't exciting for them. This feels like loss to them. And so we wanted them to celebrate, and they were grieving, and we didn't know how to reconcile that.
And and again, this is not the time I probably share this story, but we were in so much pain from betrayal, misunderstanding that did end well as it could have. And we're thankful for that. And we learned a lot, but we were just hurting. And then it's like God's moving us on. And it almost felt like we had no idea what we were about to walk into, mind you. But we had some, our pain spoke too much trying to leave. So some things it's just also owning, man, I didn't share that well. I didn't do that well. And man, I need to really grow from that. So we've had, we could do a whole segment on what we've learned, what you shouldn't do, and what was painful, and how we've had to apologize. And all.
It's in the book.
It's in the book. In the book. But it's like, that's a part of the story.
No, I appreciate that. And I do know what it's like, people there's a mentor once said, everyone you start the journey to the mountain with, you don't end up on the top with the same people, because you guys did write a book. And I remember actually being in your backyard when we were talking about this actually as a book proposal. So it's so cool. And tell us a little bit about the heart, about why you wanted to even write this book. And then also, since being one of the single people here, not married, and actually a very small family, I'd love to get a little bit into too how the church and the idea of treating family for those who are not blessed to currently have that as well, because it's something that I personally have wrestled with, thinking that we tend to think of family looks like just one thing,
Exactly.
and obviously it's broader than that.
Yeah, well, family is messy, it's hard, it's clunky, it's all of the things. And, but we have learned over and over again our last, not just our whole lives, but our last 23 plus years together that it's worth it. So it's like, man, when we walked through this last 5 years, 5.5, 6-ish years of our life, more than ever, this theme of family and that it's easy to want to give up on became so prominent for us. And you can kind of share how it came about if you want, but it's really a message that we want to help remove the barriers to building belonging wherever you're at, whether you're single, whether you're married with 4 kids. There's so many different aspects of family,
Yeah.
and there was a really sweet, in the middle of my second battle of cancer, this opportunity came about.
Yeah. Yeah. I remember hearing somebody say this recently, how the irony, paradox, whatever you want to call it, of community fellowship, something that you call family, is it is the place that you are likely to get wounded the most. And it is the place that you get healed the most. So
Mhm.
if you've been wounded by something that was supposed to be safety and family, what the tendency is then, oh, I need to isolate and pull away because I can't trust anybody anymore. But the lie behind that is like, well, loneliness, isolation only perpetuates all the pain.
Yeah.
So how do you heal? Well, you do it in the context of a safe place of family and community. So because of our story, which, just teasers, is she came through a background of sexual abuse. We walked through an affair, year 3 of marriage. We've been through church betrayals and church splits. We've had kind of like everything that we said I do too got tested in a sense. And so we're writing this book saying we're not experts. We don't have a PhD in family, but we sure have climbed this mountain for a very long time. We see ourselves as guides. And I think that's a good way to approach it, is we all need people who have been on the same mountain, who have maybe
Yeah.
climbed a little bit further. They've got a few scars and they've scrapes and they fall down a few times. So we wrote this just to say, here's our experience. We've experienced all these painful places and something that was supposed to be family. And then here's the things we worked through to get to a place now where we really feel like we have an amazing marriage and a healthy family. But it's not just being married and having kids. For many people, their
Yeah.
quote chosen family is more family to them than their family of origin.
Yeah. And talk about, to this question, like being single, like we've taken moments in the book to say, hey, we were married at 21. We don't know what that experience is like, or we've never adopted a child. We don't know. We're not a work environment like some people are building family. It looks different. We're in the church here. And so we've tried to take different, really, again, learning from others in the book
Yeah.
and then giving that away. But why don't you share that part?
Yeah, a
I
few
think this
years
is
ago, it
powerful.
was, when we were in the midst of a lot of the trial stuff and we were
About
living
touch-
in Burbank, and 2 stories. We had 4 singles that were in their 30s, mid to late 30s. One had been divorced, the rest had never been married, and we had them around our kitchen table, this very table right here. And we were asking them the question, like, what does family look like for you, as a single person? And our friend Peta, who is now married and just had her first child, I think when she's 42, a really redemptive story. But I remember she said something, and we put it in the book because it's kind of changed the perspective for us. She said, belonging is not just something that you find, it's something that you bring. And I remember we just stopped and we were like, can you say that again?
Yeah.
And I think her point is that if you believe that you know your worth, your identity, your value, then you can step into an environment, and if you believe you belong, you can bring that sense of belonging to others. And we had a lady, an amazing single lady in her mid to late 40s, and at our church here in Malibu, and we've kind of, I almost said prided ourselves. We would never be proud. No, we've really tried to create this
Right.
sense of, man, this is a family and this is a healthy place and a safe place. But she was coming for many, many weeks, and she basically went to coffee with me and she shared the story. She said, I came for several weeks, and at the end of the service, everybody was hanging out and they had their little pockets of connection. And she goes, I stood in the middle of the room several weeks in a row and not one person came and talked to me. And I remember hearing this and I felt really sad because I thought, oh, that's the opposite of what we want to be about. And I said, well, what did you do? She said, I went and I prayed. And I said, God, what do I do? And what he told me was, I want you to go find every person who's by themselves, and I want you to help them experience a sense of family right where they are. And that was so good, because I think she could have easily gotten angry at the church, said, I'm never coming back. And instead, she said, no, I'm going to actually bring belonging. And then our friend Joshua, who's one of our closer friends, we've known for 25 years, single guy, never been married, amazing career in Dallas, beautiful home. And we were asking him, like, what does it look like for you to experience family? And he said, intentionality has been the main key. He said, I moved into a particular neighborhood so that I could be near my friends who do have family. I go on a walk every night around 6 o'clock so that I'll run into my neighbors. I'll invite my neighbors over. He loves to cook, and I'll have a meal for them in my home. And I just thought, instead of being passive and waiting, he actually stepped in to kind of bring that sense of family.
Do you think the church as a whole does and I'm painting with very broad strokes. This is the big click brush icon on Microsoft Paint for those still on Windows 95.
No.
Do you think the church does a less than stellar job of sort of communicating that the 1 Corinthians 7 mode, that singleness is like that the default is not necessarily married? I think there's this perception sometimes that, and you hear things like, oh man, until you're married, you just don't know.
Yeah.
You haven't you'll never know. It's like a mirror, and like all true things, right? It's obviously an extraordinarily beautiful refining process, but do you encounter that sort of, and I'll call it a bit of a misnomer, that, the idea that you are, if you're single, you somehow cannot level into the fullness, of the Christian experience. I feel personally, I've experienced that in some ways, but I'm curious as pastors if you guys, share that view.
Yeah, I mean, it's easy though, even for me to say this as a married person who's leading a church,
That's what I
right?
was trying to think.
And I think obviously the funny thing is scripture where you got like Paul saying it is better, to be single. You've got Paul and Jesus who were single. So you're like, well, there's obviously high biblical precedence for the advantage of singleness, and yet I think culturally within the church, we do elevate that, you are limited. You can't fulfill the highest purpose without being married and having children. I just don't think that's fair. I think it's isolating. I think it perpetuates a feeling of
It does.
loneliness and shame, and so I think I would love to see even the church empowering singles even more, but not as, oh, this is just this side ministry. Like these are the singles. Because I even think more we single out the singles out of an effort to make them not feel single, which, what do I know?
Hang on, I have this thought.
Oh,
So
great.
no, but I love this question. I'm gonna like walk away from this and really probably chew on this a little bit more. But I was at a conference one time years ago, and I met these two women single women. I mean, like old. I mean, like single. Like I don't know. Although it doesn't matter. I'm not gonna name their names, but I don't know. They're in their 50s maybe, and one of them was kind of like a missionary. And then one of them had this incredible job, and someone was like, gosh, asking them the question as Christians can do in this setting where they were speaking like, I mean, has it been hard to be single this whole life? Do you want to be married? It was almost like they were stunned. And it was like, but this has been the greatest joy of my life. Like I chose this, like almost like that. It was foreign to them that we, or the person asking them, would think that like, oh gosh, I'm like, kind of like, I'm so sorry you're still single, because they carried to the topic of family and belonging. They knew how deeply they were the beloved of God. And I don't mean to make it a cliche thing like, well, just be secure and you're fine. But they so deeply belonged, and they so lived their life that way, which is part of the testimony they were sharing in different spheres of life. But it was just like, actually, this is what I chose. And I am so happy. And the things that I get to do in my life because I chose this, I wouldn't trade for anything.
I've been to church services where they're like, all right, folks, we've got a rare treat for you tonight. Okay. We have here in the flesh on stage, a single person, right? I mean, of course they were available. It's Friday night. What else are they going to be doing? Right. So let's bring out a single person and interview them. And it's like one step away from like going to a zoo. And they're like, so what do you do on like weeknights? Someone asked them, and they're like, well, like, what do you do on weeknights? Like, I watch a show, I go for a walk, I hang out with friends. Like, what do you do? And it's like, don't assume I have cats, right? She did have cats, at one point, but that's beside the point, So I just think it's something, because like people will catch themselves. I have a dear friend who's a pastor, Evan Wickham, down here in San Diego, awesome guy, and he will always, whenever we're in a room with like 50 other guys in our men's group, and a speaker says something, called marriage splaining, right? Where they'll just be like, oh man, guys, you know this, right? Because you know how you didn't know Christ until you got married, really. Things like that, where they mean well, etc. And Evan will shout like, or say something in the room is like, or if you're whole single and, trying to live consecrated out to God, on your own, that works too. Just, and he's married with, kids,
Right.
and it's like, it's great. So I love that. And I don't even like the language, but then again, there's a lot of issues. ARP calls, there's millennials that are born before 85, geriatric millennials. And so there's a lot of branding issues in the church that we can get into. I'm fine with singles if we move to calling you guys doubles, because that's like tennis and that's totally
That
fine. So we can do doubles ministry, singles ministry, no triples
None of
ministry.
that.
That's not,
you
not,
could
not, not
you
theological.
could start
Old
it
Testament.
with this
Fantastic.
podcast. Like the title is, I want to welcome my doubles, Chris and Julie.
Ooh.
You could just,
Singles and doubles with the Bennetts. I think that works. I want to make sure we get to some more serious, and we've done cancer and calling and purpose, but we did hint at, some stories of spiritual warfare. Chris, you mentioned something early in the interview, which is about, and I'd be remiss if I didn't ask you this, hence I'm wearing the Same Day Deliverance shirt and I host a podcast on spiritual warfare. But you mentioned that the moment you step out and say, like, I'm going to do this in obedience, right? That's like a magnet, right? It's basically getting out of the car in the Sierras in summer and the mosquitoes are like, well, let's go. So it's like, help us think, before we get to the spiritual warfare stories, talk to me a little about opposition when you are walking out God's calling, and how do you discern the difference between general opposition of just like, hey, like, we live in a broken world and we're going to do tough things, versus, no, I think some of this is a coordinated spiritual resistance that God in his wisdom is permitting me to go through, like a resistance training, if you will.
Yeah.
So, because you mentioned being opposed when
Yeah,
you set
that's
out
really
and set the intention.
Think about the passage where it says, do not be unaware of the devil's schemes. I mean, I don't think we're to fear the devil, but I think we need to be aware that there is a spiritual, reality. And I think anytime we're stepping into something that is, I mean, this sounds way too hyper charismatic, but taking territory or stepping out into something that God has called us into, there should be some level of awareness that, yeah, there's an enemy that's not excited about what we're stepping into. I think for us and our calling around family, moving into a new land, I think there are, spiritual principalities in different areas that represent different things that are opposed differently. Oklahoma is very different than LA. I think because of what we are called into, I think there was an attack actually against it. I think that's why, if you look at the enemy wants to rob things, destroy things at infancy. He tried to do it with Moses, who was going to be a deliverer, obviously tried to do it with Jesus, as the Messiah. And I think at whatever level the enemy is aware of who we are and what we're called into, there is an opposition against us, either to us to abort it, to divert us, to discourage us, to get us to settle, whatever it may be. And you can even see when Jesus began his ministry, it began with approval from his father and identity as a son. And then he's led by the Spirit immediately into a wilderness. And in that wilderness, there was, the 40 days of fasting, but then he was immediately met with opposition, which was in the form of temptation. And we could say, well, that was Jesus. But I certainly would say, in a very similar way, when God calls you into something, you step out into it, there is going to be a level of opposition. Now, how do you discern that? There's consequences of, sinful decisions we make, for sure. There's the testing of our faith that God brings, which he calls pruning, which is to increase our faith. And then for sure, there is spiritual warfare dynamics that go on. How do you discern which one?
So when the Father speaks identity over Jesus in the desert, just as Chris had mentioned, the model that Jesus gives us is that he didn't veer from that identity, right? And so when he was tempted, as long as he came back to the identity of why he came and who he was, then he was covered and he was able to press on. And it's no different from us. So when we know not just our true identity as like, well, I'm a son of God, I'm a daughter of God, I'm a son of God, I'm the beloved, but actually like when we aren't what we do. I understand that concept, but it is when I know my true identity. So if you ask me what my true identity in the kingdom is, I'm going to tell you really quickly. I'm an evangelist of the mind. I'm called to help change the way people think. I can tell you that in seconds. And so everything I do in my life, I'm coming back to that. And anytime I veer outside of that and what I'm doing for the Lord, if you will, then I just come, I open myself up to warfare. I've seen it happen over and over again. So that's a bit, if you think about it, Jesus came to destroy the works of the devil and to make people well. So in that, as Jesus is destroying the works of the devil through believers, right? Through carrying our light, we don't just curse the darkness. We want to light a candle. We want to shine bright, all of those things. I have to remember who I am. I have to have that revealed to me so that I can understand and discern that is the enemy. And I just need an aspirin. There's times, I had a time in my life where I just kept going, well, I need more inner healing and I have something else. And this thing is just going on and on. I was pursuing it and I was praying and I was doing all this stuff. And the Lord brought something to my attention. And he said, I want you to take this test. And it was through a friend. And so I got this blood work done. And again, I'm not going to get into all where it was. And I discovered my B vitamins, I was so low in B6 that when I got the test results back, when I looked at what was going on in my body, the Lord said, you're trying to fight something spiritual that is just you got some chemical things, imbalances that are off, and you need some nutrients here. And so some of those things you're feeling, this deep anxiety, all this, it's coming from here. And this doctor didn't know. And he's like, sometimes we have to discern what is spiritual and then what needs that, and then how those fit together.
Y'all, the book comes out. I so appreciate all the wisdom you shared from your journey. And I think like to anyone out there right now who's just pondering, making a crazy decision, they think they might have the inklings, and if they can borrow and learn anything from your story, what do you want them to know about, maybe taking that giant leap of faith?
Well, the Bible says that without faith, it's impossible to please him. And I think what I found is, I shared get wisdom, pray, don't be hasty, all the things. But when you step out, whatever we do by faith, God partners with us. God's not looking for servants. He's looking for friends, and he's looking for people he can come alongside. And I think that's what we found is it's not because we did something perfectly. There's no perfect way to do faith. We try to do things faithfully. We try and walk as best we know how. And even if we get off a little bit, I've seen him veer us back, and he'll get us where he wants us to go. But when you step out, you should expect opposition, but you can expect that he will carry you through. And I don't know how long it'll take, but I'm just telling you, the life we're experiencing now, this is not me saying, quote, the blessed life and #blessed life. I'm saying we are walking in the reward of obedience, not perfection. We're walking in the reward of not giving up on what we felt God called us to and almost holding him to his word. And he has been faithful, and it's been worth it. I don't want to do it again. I know that we'll have hard in the future, but it's been worth it.
And I would just say, even when we miss it in our yeses and our adventurous jumps off the cliff or the climb, he still meets you there. Even if it's like, did we miss it? Did we not? He's such a kind God that he will come alongside you and take you where you need to be.
So in the midst of battling cancers and poverty seasons and uncertainty, etc., can the Bennetts declare with their whole heart and of sound mind that God is still good?
Indeed.
He's good, and he's better than we even know.
Yeah.
Amazing. Well, I know Jesus is here, and he said he approves that message. So, we have been speaking with the Bennetts. Please do go purchase their book. I want to hold it up for us, Chris, so we can get you guys there.
Fighting for Family.
Please.
There we are.
You can go to fightingforfamily.org. It's got events. We're doing a book tour. You can come hang out with us.
Yeah.
Absolutely. You can. If you ever find yourselves up in paradise, know that that's where this book stems from. So we thank you, Bennetts, for all the work you're doing and appreciate you telling your story.
Thanks, Ryan.
And we will talk with you soon.
Thanks for being a great friend and support, buddy. Appreciate you.